very good morning to all the participants. Today we have with us Professor Muthuswamy Sivakumar, and he will be giving us a talk on the life and contributions of Steven Weinberg. Professor Sivakumar did his BSc and MSc from University of Madras and completed his PhD under Professor P.M. Matthews in Department of Theoretical Physics, University of Madras on relativistic wave equations and Kaluza-Klein theory. After postdoctoral research in Institute of Mathematical Sciences, Chennai, and SN Bose National Center for Basic Sciences, Kolkata, from 1987 to 1990, he joined the University of Hyderabad as a lecturer in 1990. He is currently a professor in School of Physics at the University of Hyderabad. He has visited Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics, Trieste, Italy, several times as visiting scientist and associate member. Other short-term visits abroad include visits to Max Planck Institute for Gravitational Physics at Potsdam several times, P.N. Lebedev Institute of Physical Science, Moscow 2011, Center for Quantum Spacetime, Seoul, S. Korea 2008, Sao Paulo University 2008. Some of Sir's broad research interest is in theoretical physics, especially in quantum field theory with application to problems high energy physics and condensed matter physics and general theory of relativity. Professor Sivakumar has numerous publications, and some of the selected ones are LRS Bianchi Type 1 Cosmological Model in F bracket R, T, Theory of Gravity with delta T. Another next one is consistent non-minimal couplings of massive high spin particles, emergent geometry from quantized spacetime, the hydrodynamical limit of quantum Hall system, duality and massive gauge invariant theories, is the $O3 sigma dollar model with the Hopf term exactly equivalent to a higher spin theory, gauge invariant description of massive higher spin particles by dimensional reduction. These are some of Sir's selected publications. Now coming to his awards and honors. Sir was an associate member at Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics, Trieste, Italy, from 1996 to 2004. He was an INSA visiting fellow in 1994. He's a fellow of Andhra Pradesh Academy of Sciences, Telangana Academy of Sciences. Sir has an abiding interest in academic outreach activities, physics education, and pedagogy. He directed two SERC schools on theoretical high-energy physics. As General Secretary of Indian Physics Association, Hyderabad chapter, he conducted quiz for schools and colleges across the city and also organized a one-day workshop for school teachers on teaching basic physics. He has written a pedagogic article summarizing basic concepts behind renormalization group, basics of renormalization group, divide and conquer, and plans to write more such articles on different topics like broken symmetry, quantum Hall effect, space-time symmetries, and representation, and more like that. Sir, we are truly honored that you'll be giving today's talk.
Okay. Oh, thank you. First, at the outset, I wish to thank Junior Science Club uh, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk about the life and contributions of Steven Weinberg. As all of you know, a month back, exactly a month back, he passed away at the age of 88 years. And it's a time to recall and back his preeminent position in the theoretical physics of the second half of the century, of last century, where he was a really a driving force behind various developments in physics. So first I will just give a brief biographical details. Steven Weinberg was born in 1933 in New York. His parents were Jewish immigrants, and his father was a stenographer in a court. And he did schooling in a school. It's called a Bronx High School of Science. Actually, it is still existing, and this school was started in 1930, and the whole goal of that school is to yeah, to bring out yeah, yeah, best in the science, and encourage people to do science. So that is the way the school, and the getting admission in that school was also very competitive and difficult. And he did his schooling there, and maybe as we will see later, I mean, one of his classmates with whom he studied also shared a Nobel Prize, and that school has also produced several Nobel laureates. At the age of 16, he realized that his interest is in physics, and more precisely in theoretical physics. And then he went to do undergraduate study at Cornell University. And then there, even at undergraduate level, people realized that he is quite of a, you know, uh, a very remarkable person. And they asked him to, I mean, he was sent as a postdoc for 1 year. He not postdoc. He was 1 year. He went as a visitor to Niels Bohr Institute for Theoretical Physics at Copenhagen. And from there he sort of went to do PhD in Princeton University under Sam Freeman. Um, and 1 year he was a postdoc at Columbia University. From there, he moved to have various positions in different universities. First, he was in University of California, then Berkeley, then he went to Harvard University. He was there for quite some time till '83. Then he moved to University of Texas. So there he remained till his death. He has, of course, received several awards and honors. It will be too difficult to list all of them. But of course, as everyone knows, that he got a Nobel Prize in physics. We'll discuss more about that, which he shared with Salam and Glashow. And in 2020, he received a breakthrough prize. It's much more. It's a $3 million award, a big award, which he received last year. Now, um, coming back to his broad interest, his research interest is basically quantum field theory. So we'll just try to discuss what is it, what is this quantum field theory is all about. So we all know what is this universe is made up of. Is a kind of a question which we have been asking from the time immemorial. So this question for as an answer now, as whole universe is made up of fields. So what is meant by a field? All of you have studied electric field and a magnetic field. So these are all the kind of systems with infinite degrees of freedom, to put it technically, which means that every point in space, and there are some fields which is we call them as an electric field, and then there is a magnetic field, and then associate with these fields is the particles are there, which everyone knows the name as the photons. So this photon is an excitation of the quantum field of the electromagnetic field. So we have a concept of a field which comes first, then associated with that a concept of a particle which is the photon field. But then we also know that the world is made up of several particles like electrons, proton. But at a later stage, now we know there are more particles like quarks and other such elementary particles are there. Now, all these elementary particles are also excitations of some fundamental quantity which are called as a fields. That is, there is a field for an electron whose excitations we see it as an electron. There is a field for a proton whose excitation we see as a proton. Like that, there is a way of having everything described in terms of your field. And this field has to be quantized very much like an electromagnetic field on quantization gave you a particle attribute called photon. This is the kind of a thing which was developed around the time when quantum mechanics came by Dirac, Heisenberg, Pauli, and others. So we have a quantum theory for particles is what we call them as a quantum mechanics. So in the same way, we have a fields, which are the classic fields, and the quantum theory of fields is what is called a quantum field theory. So Weinberg's basic interest and study is in this broad subject of quantum field theory. So first I'll discuss his Nobel Prize winning work. So usually in textbooks, we say there are four fundamental forces of nature, namely a strong force, which is basically holds the nucleus together in a nucleus, and then there is a weak force, which is what causes the beta decay and all in radioactivity. And then the well-known electromagnetic force, and then there is a gravitational force. So his Nobel Prize winning work is to say that the two forces among these four, the two of them, the weak force and the electromagnetic force, are just a one facet called electroweak force, which by chance in our energy system appears to be as a two different forces. So this is basically called unifying the two forces of weak and electromagnetic force. The nature of the two forces are very different. Weak forces is a very short range force. Electromagnetic force is a very long range force. So to study, his work is basically to see how one can, the fact that these two forces are unified to appear as if they are two forces, but basically there is only one force, which is called the electroweak force. So here, among the elementary particles, there are class of particles which are called as leptons, which undergo weak and electromagnetic interaction. In contrast, there are particles called hadrons, which undergo also strong interaction. And what he did was to have a model for all the leptons in the world, and the forces these particles undergo is through a process in which there is an exchange of particles which takes place. Then now we understand the electromagnetic force is through exchange of photons is what causes as an electromagnetic force. In the same way, all the fundamental forces of nature comes out through exchange of carrier particle, some fields whose on quantization gives you as a particles. So, but then for weak interaction, to have a short range, the corresponding particles must have a non-zero rest mass. In contrast, electromagnetic field has a force in which the short range, because it's infinite range, the photon has a rest mass which is zero. So how do we reconcile all these two things as if there is a single force coming together? So Weinberg's work was to adapt some of the important concepts and which are developments which took place around that time, and he applied the concept of local gauge invariance, which is actually a symmetry of the theory where the transformation takes place different at points and differently. Then a concept of a broken symmetry, that is a symmetry which appears in a Hamiltonian or in a theory is not respected at a lowest energy state, is not sort of having. The clear example is like a ferromagnet or something, where the lower energy, you see all the spins pointing around some direction. So that's whereas the fundamental theory is not like that. The original Hamiltonian. So that's a two-line thing on the broken symmetry. And then there is a Higgs mechanism where what happens when there is a broken symmetry, for system with a local gauge invariant and a broken symmetry, both are fused together, then there is something called a Higgs mechanism. He had all these ingredients together and he constructed a model uh, for leptons. So this is his Nobel. I mean, what you see on the right hand top corner is the Nobel Prize winning paper. It is actually about 2 or 2.5 pages paper, and the title is actually a model of leptons. As I told you, leptons are elementary particles which undergo weak electromagnetic interaction, not strong interaction. And in electrons, muons, these are all an examples for these leptons. And so his model unified weak and electromagnetic force by having the force carriers, namely the gauge particles, uh, all of them in a single, what you call as a multiplet. I mean, this is what I mean by saying this is a force is sort of a unified. So there is but then the differences show up at a low energy because the symmetry is called as a broken symmetry. It is not manifest at a and this combined with the Higgs mechanism, the mechanism which is what makes these gauge particles get a mass and make these forces a short range force. The predictions of this model, uh, there is something called a neutral current, and the model could also predict the mass of these particles which carries these weak forces, which are massive particles. This involves charged W particles, that is a positive and a negative W particle, and there is also a charged neutral particle called Z particles. And these mass particles were later discovered in the same mass range in which his model predicted. And also in his model, apart from these things, there was also a neutral spin zero particles which were also set of a present. In a sense, this was one of the predictions of this model. That particle is what is the particle called the Higgs scalar, which I'm sure all of you must have heard about, which is which is which is sometimes is called as a God particle in a wrong way. But I mean, this is actually one of the major discovery which was born somewhat recently, that these Higgs particles were sort of his prediction of the Higgs particle was also born by the experiment. And he received a Nobel Prize along with Abdul Salam, a Pakistani scientist, who was in Imperial College, and also with Sheldon Glashow. Glashow was also in Harvard University, and Weinberg was also in Harvard University at the same time. And also I should mention, this Glashow and Weinberg were also studied together in this Bronx School, which I mentioned. They were also high school friends. And then they both also these three shared a Nobel Prize for this work, because different facets of it, these two other authors also sort of contributed in it. And a very clear model was details, with all the details, was a published version, came from Weinberg. I should say this paper of Weinberg is one of the highest cited paper in complete physics. It's around 18,000 citations are there for it. And then so these things are only for leptons. There are also other hadrons are there, and then there is also the force of strong interaction. So this is called quarks and leptons. So for the theory of quarks, which is what later through nuclear physics and all gives rise to strong interaction. The fundamental theory, which is called quantum chromodynamics, was developed, and even in that, Weinberg played an important role in finding out the consequences and all. Though the actual forces of quantum chromodynamics was discovered by some others, sort of a scientist. This full theory of the strong force and the electromagnetic force together is called the standard model, and Weinberg played a very important role in this standard model of physics. Um, in fact, one of the things which Weinberg did was to see that the coupling of these three theories had a unification, and so that all the three at a high energy, all the three couplings will get unified at certain thing. And there are also, I mean, he also contributed, which are still not complete experiments because it involves a much higher scale of accelerators. And even in that, he played an important role in developing this. And from this he has also made contributions areas in physics. One of the important thing is was even before this Nobel Prize work and all, he had something called the low energy theorems. See, all of us know that there is an electromagnetic field, and the force carriers of the electromagnetic field are spin 1 particles. And it has called a graviton, which has but then we don't see anything more than graviton. There is no classical fields which correspond to spin 3. I mean, why is that happening like that? So Weinberg gave basic, you are using some basic notions of Lorentz covariance, gauge invariance, and the field theory principles, which is called a scattering matrix theory, S matrix. Show that if there is a spin 1 particle, it should have the completely charge conservation. This must be the possible. And also, if it were a spin 2 particle, there should be a universality of coupling, which means all the particles will couple to the gravity in an equal way. So this is something which is sort of a built in the general theory of relativity. The whole edifice of general relativity is built on is something called a principle of equivalence. And yeah, what I mean, this is nothing more than a manifestation which is we all see in our day-to-day life, that if I take two particles, one of 5 kg, another is about 10 kg, if I drop at the same time, they hit the ground at the same time. This happens because of the equality of something, the gravitational mass and the inertial mass being sort of equal, and this is raised to an equivalence principle. So what Weinberg could show is that from a general principles of quantum field theory, that this is what should happen, that gravity must this is again at a low energy level, that he could prove this kind of general result. And next is important development is in something called as an effective field theory. He is a pioneer in sort of developing and promoting effective field theory. This effective field theory is a modern way of understanding what is quantum field theory and how we study the phenomena when you apply quantum field theory. It is a type of approximation that describes a phenomenon at a given length scales, right, while averaging over the shorter length and energy scales. See, this is something which is being doing generally. See, you see, suppose we take an example of your water. We can study the water at a different length scale. At a macroscopic level, we can describe water in terms of fluid dynamics. So there is a associated equations are some like a fluid mechanics equation, like a Navier-Stokes equation, and then there are parameters associated with that which are defined. Then we can go to a smaller length scale and look at water as a water molecule and study it in terms of molecular physics. Or we can go to much smaller length scale, study it water in terms of proton and electron. Then we can study it at a much smaller length scales in terms of quarks and things like that. Uh, but then one can study the whole thing for a different length scales. We have a different kind of a physics which is sort of involved, and there is a way the systems sort of length scales get separated, and we can just do we are able to do physics. In fact, if such a division of scales were not possible, we would, right, even Newton would not have studied his theories until quantum theory of gravity is was discovered. And so the fact is that we are able to do physics so that at every length scale there is an effective theory which describes that. So his point, I mean, the point was, even when that kind of a thing goes through even at a quantum field theory level, even a standard model should be seen as an approximation to a more fundamental theory. At every scales, we try to add a more fundamental theory of that kind. So this is a way you describe physics in a field theory. In fact, he proposed this idea in a paper which is called Effective Lagrangians. It was, sorry, which he gave when Schwinger's 60th birthday. There was a conference and people presented some thoughts. So he presented this in a paper which appeared in a journal Physica. It's called Effective Lagrangians. So in that, he sort of built and proposed it, and then it is now being taken up and to a much larger level. In fact, these techniques of this one, effective field theory, which is now known as EFT, to wide kind of areas in physics. We can understand nuclear physics coming from a quantum chromodynamics in effective field theory approximations. That also tells us to understand how come nuclear physics models and all works nicely. Because of these effective field theory approaches, and one understands superconductivity and cosmology. Right? In all these things, Weinberg himself has contributed a lot to promote this concept of an effective field theory. In fact, now there is set up a series of lectures, and I think there is also a YouTube channel which is called All is EFT. And the first talk in that, of course, was given by Weinberg, where he sort of a reminiscence how he came through this idea of effective field theory and how it is done. So this effective field theory is somewhat, other side of the Wilson. Those who know that it's of Wilson's renormalization group ideas. And in fact, at some schools, he offered to teach a course in Eriche school. Said he wanted to learn Wilsonian ideas, and then he offered to teach a course, and that's also one important subject. In which he has sort of learned, and then it has contributed for this thinking of the subject. And there is one very important paper, interesting paper, which I don't think many people know, that he has written a paper. It is called Superconductivity for Particle Theorists. This is a paper which appeared in the Progress of Theoretical Physics, in this reference which I have. This he gave in Nambu's 60th birthday meeting. In fact, this year it's Nambu's centennial year of birthday, and Professor Bindu Bamba is also a colleague here. His student. She organized centennial meeting of Nambu and his contributions. And what Weinberg did was, for Nambu's contribution, he gave presented his understanding of superconductivity, or I mean, he felt how it should be understood, superconductivity. And in fact, he says that he wanted to, because Nambu made a very, he also got a Nobel Prize and all for his work on broken symmetry, which Weinberg used for his work on um, electroweak theory. That Nambu is a person who understood superconductivity and he applied it as a rich cross fertilization with particle physics. So what Weinberg did is basically is just gave his understanding the way he felt should be understood for superconductivity. So what he does is I mean, he says that I mean, in fact, it is there in his book, which I will tell later, that the superconductivity is just a material in which there is a electromagnetic gauge symmetry is spontaneously is broken. So what he is wanted to say is that the general features of the superconductivity, I think many of you must be knowing that superconductivity is a right, where there is a current flows without resistance, and there is an expulsion of magnetic field, and then there is I mean, it's a perfect diamagnet, and then there are other phenomena like Josephson effect. So many other phenomena are there, and he wanted to say all these phenomena can be understood in a model independent consequence of a spontaneous breakdown of an electromagnetic gauge invariance. So he derives all these things, all these effects, just from making one assumption that this system, that is the electromagnetic gauge invariance, is spontaneously broken. And in this paper, this I mean article, he says offers such a derivation, and then he sort of derives the whole thing is that. But then to know the much details of why this, I mean, why this, how this gauge invariance happens, how to what temperature, I mean, many of these things, the microscopic BCS theory is required. But then for a broad understanding of, I mean, this phenomena itself, he felt that that is not required, and then his articles, he has explained all these things, which has also found in his textbook, which I will come to it later. So this is one pedagogic piece which he did, which is very very interesting, and I recommend people to read it. Then he also applied to other branches. See, usually, in at least in 1970s or so, particle physics people knew quantum field theory, and then there were things like general theory of relativity, which was not part of any course for a training of a particle physics people. And general relativity was taught in even in some places, even in applied maths departments also. But general relativity was taught as if it is in a geometric way, like the way Einstein first gave it. But then he felt that he sort of disliked that way of presenting the subject. So he started teaching such courses, general relativity, for some time. And then where he then it led to a book, which is, I'm sure all of you must be knowing, his book on gravitation and cosmology. It came in 1972, where gravity and deriving general relativity is all presented from a particle physics point of view, and then particle physics way of understanding physics as a gauge symmetry, as a way. And that book is really a landmark book. For people who learned in general relativity and that generation. And he also realized that early universe is a rich source for high energy particle collisions, and he developed necessary tools for this kind of cross fertilization between cosmology and particle physics. all these early universe things about the nucleosynthesis and helium abundance, many things which how it happens, these are all. And he actually also contributed and promoted this, and this led to now something is known as a standard model of cosmology, where it's coming from a Big Bang theory, and expansion of the Big Bang led to all these phenomena, and that is sort of a standard model of cosmology. In that sense, Weinberg had a prominent role in developing both a standard model in particle physics and a standard model in cosmology. And apart from that, he put his mind to one of the very important, not problem, which is called a cosmological constant, which is we can call that as a weight of the vacuum. So usually when we say vacuum, we mean vacuum means nothing is there. But that is not true for a quantum field theorist, because for a quantum field theorist, it's a vacuum means there is always a fields are always there. If there are fields, there will be fluctuations of this field. And these fluctuations of this field will cause some energy. This is exactly the same as, almost the same as those who studied quantum mechanics would know that there is harmonic oscillator, and harmonic oscillator, there is a fluctuations, and there is a 0-point energy of the harmonic oscillator. So in the same way, quantum fields have a 0-point energy, which is actually the addition of all the 0-point energy of the various modes of the fields. And one can understand, so the quantum field theory was the problems associated with with this 0-point energy, or the energy of this vacuum, was first pointed out by Weinberg in a book, in his paper. This is called a cosmological constant problem. This paper is means one of the highly cited paper after his Nobel Prize, standard model paper. This has around 7,000 citations. And in 2015, we had a centennial General Relativity's 100-year celebration, and the American Physical Society had a collection of all the landmark papers on general relativity. Together, they brought it out, and there, this paper of the Weinberg finds a place in it. So here is just nothing more than brings this problem to the outside world, to others. He has been thinking about it. To some extent, this problem was anticipated by others, like Zeldovich in US and others. They were sort of aware of it. But then he really did different ways of understanding this. What are the possible solutions and all? He brought it to that. So what is this the problem? So basic problem is, if you can estimate the vacuum energy densities from roughly, is like looking at 0-point energies of the various modes, it comes to be around 10 power 120. But actually, in fact, it was, if it was such a big number, right, the energy due to the universe would have completely collapsed, and you and I won't be here to see these things, which is not true at all. So but it was actually believed to be mean zero. And he raised a question that why this this number, energy of the vacuum, is called a cosmological constant. At least one would have known that Einstein tried to introduce this, and later he regretted it. And those stories one would have known. It is the same cosmological constant. So he was in this Reviews of Modern Physics article, he raised this question: why this cosmological constant is small? He offered several solutions, and one of them he offered was something called a mild anthropic principle. In basically what it means, the anthropic principle is why certain thing happens, because that's why our life will be there. Only then we will be here to see it. But he suggested in 89 that that this gravitational constant should not, it should take a small value. If it's become too small value, then that is also not work, and it should not also take a too big value. If it were and then it should be a positive sign, and that kind of an argument. This is all only numerical estimates he made. If it were smaller than that, then it will completely collapse, and you right, nothing will happen. If it was too big, little bit bigger than some number, then the universe will keep expanding it, and nothing will happen. There will be no structure at all, no galaxies, no Milky Way, no solar system, no you and I. So these kind of things cannot happen. Therefore, he feels that it should be some number. It should not be too big or too small, and it should be positive. And he made that as things. He also raised a question that vacuum energy density, that is, the energy of this cosmological constant per unit volume, right, that is a fixed number, whereas is the same as the mass density, which is now. See, mass density will be much bigger at a lower energy scale, early time, and then as a universe expands, right, mass density will keep on decreasing, because as a universe expands, all the particles will be going, the energy density, mass density will be decreasing. So the thing is that he, in that paper, he also raises this question: why is this vacuum energy density is? But then what happens is that that vacuum energy density and the mass density now are sort of a nearly same. So this is, I think, now called as a cosmic coincidence problem or something. So he also raised this question, in that paper. So it is not so much this paper was sort of, he offered some of these as a solutions, but it was clear that, it is more, he wanted to bring an awareness of this major problem to a broader audience. And indeed, in 1998, astronomers did discover that universe is accelerating, and the acceleration of the universe can be understood as there is a cosmological constant, which is a positive cosmological constant, and and the values which is not, which is around the values which was Weinberg suggested, at that time. So in that sense, he made a that is one of his contributions in this. He also, before that, he also did some, the last decade or so, he is also, one is he's the last decade, he has worked a lot on cosmology, about applying effective field theory method to inflation, and about the cosmic microwave background, the isotropies and the perturbations. He has set a lot of formalisms for that, right, and then he has he has done some enormous quantity of work. And another thing in the last decade or so, which he has been doing, is on foundations of quantum mechanics. He's very unclear. He's very dissatisfied with the way the present interpretation of quantum mechanics is. Namely, that quantum mechanics, we have the usual Copenhagen interpretation, that is, the quantum system. We have the act of measurement pushes the wave function or collapses the wave function to one of the eigenvalues, and those things and all. He was very, very dissatisfied. So in the last decade or so, he has been trying to modify even a quantum mechanics by to have unitary evolutions, where with there is a kind of a stochastic time development things, and then he was trying to see whether such a thing can avoid this. I'm not been an expert or not following so much, but and also I don't know. How much the community is taking it, but it's the last 10 years or so. That is the kind of a thing which has also occupied, and for completeness of his complete contribution in physics, I should also sort of a mention in that phase of work. See, broadly, one should understand his style of doing research and teaching. First, his style of research. See, there are scientists like Feynman or Dirac, right, who are sort of rebellious, who just kind of streak of genius, and they will do some great piece of work, right answers with right. Whereas his style is sort of a different. It's a more kind of a scholarliness is there. So, and his basic theme has always been symmetries, and then he was a kind of a unifier of different kind of themes. He takes some applied cosmology and applied in particle physics, And then when he sees, but I took idea of broken symmetry and symmetry, Higgs mechanism, and then see that whether that can be applied to particle physics. So in that sense, he has looks for a broad structure in this. And his book papers, they're all extremely, he's competent in all the formalisms. That is not the only thing, and equally competent in all this number crunching. By number crunching, I mean that very close to phenomenology, to the actual world of the physics, where you get numbers out of that, and then in calculating numbers, getting up the order of magnitude, estimation, and all these kind of things, he was extremely competent. I mean, he was equally competent in that, and he is one completely down to earth and a very pragmatic physicist. No word in philosophies and other things and all. He was not sort of involved in it. As I said, he's extremely scholarly person. So in a sense, he can be compared with people like Subramaniam Chandrasekhar. The kind of the way that the physics and thing has been research he tries to do. And he's the one person who was always very, very closely connecting teaching and research. In fact, see, he has been teaching quantum field theory for several years, and then he felt that, he says, he wrote a 3 volumes magnum opus, Quantum Theory of Fields. And the way this book came out is very different. He felt that when he taught quantum field theory, he was not able to convince the students or himself mostly that why should one do quantum field theory? Why is that the only way of doing it, introducing this? And he felt he did not like it. He felt he could not, to his satisfaction, he could not convince the students that, why one should do. So slowly he developed a perspective of why one should do quantum field theory. And, that came out as a 3-volume book. So in this book, first volume is very, very different way. His perspective of why one should do quantum field theory is, if you want to do quantum theory, and then if you want to have special theory of relativity, and if merge two, and also has one extra thing which is called cluster decomposition properties, which the S matrix must have, which is going to mean, for those who are working in statistical mechanics, must be knowing that is a connected correlation function must decay at infinity. In a more picturesque way, it is basically, it means a result which happens, like Weinberg himself says, something happening in CERN should not affect something happening in Fermilab, right? So these two things should not affect each other and all. So he put that S matrix must have this, and then if you do it, then he feels that quantum theory is the only way in which fields is the only way you will be able to implement it. In his book, the first chapter is on what is a particle, and representation of a Poincare group representation. Then it comes to S matrix, right? Like that. Then he comes about creation, annihilation operators and all. Only in the 6th chapter he introduces what we usually teach in the first semester, namely, Lagrangian formulation, Noether's theorem, and all those things comes only in the 6th chapter. So, like he himself says, this is not a pedagogically right way of teaching for a student. Though he started with that, but then it gives him a perspective in which he felt the subject should be taught. So, in that sense, that book is a very, very different book, and there's so much of depth and subtleties. The point of is very sort of we explained very sort of nicely. But then I just wanted to see how teaching and research together has gone with him. And he was a researcher until end. I checked yesterday that his last paper he wrote is on astrophysics in 2019. And he wrote one paper on which appeared in High Energy Physics Phenomenology, which came in 2020. And there's another paper which came in High Energy Physics Theory. It's something formalism, which came in 2020. And all are only single author original papers. I did not include some of the conference lectures he gave on effective field theory lectures he gave about starting when, which I have not included those kind of things. These are all original papers. These are all single author papers, which means he was productive till the end in the true sense of this word. And he was also a teacher till the end. Uh, in fact, we will see what are the books he wrote. All the books he wrote came out from his teaching, and he was teaching course till the end. In fact, after after he died, in one of the reminiscence, one of his colleague in Texas narrates a story that quite recently, last year or so, when his mother or somebody had a cancer and he could not take a course, Weinberg volunteered to take one extra course of his course along with the course he was already sort of teaching. So that's a kind of a passion of teaching. I mean, he also had, and we all know the kind of his style and that, and then you see the kind of books he wrote. Um, you see, the first book, as I told you, is on gravitational and cosmology, which is actually still, I mean, a very beautiful book when somebody wants to teach or to learn the subject. And then he had this 3-volume quantum theory of fields. In fact, volume 1 deals with all this, his perspective of introducing quantum field theory. But second volume has all these modern applications from renormalization group, L-Krovic theory, and so many, all the modern things on this, on field theory. And third is completely on supersymmetry and supergravity. Then after he wrote these books, right, then he sort of felt that he should come back for research. He wanted to do cosmology, because right after 98 these new developments of this cosmology and all came. He felt he should now get back to do cosmology. So he wanted to learn the subject, because from the time he did he wrote the book 70s, and this lot of developments took place. So when he wanted to learn the subject, he found most of these things, books, they are all, are the review articles or papers. He was not satisfied the way these things were written. So he wanted to learn for himself, and he wanted to derive for himself many of these results, because many of them involve just results only on numerical computations and things like that. And therefore he felt there should be a way in which he wants to understand completely the physics behind it with the numerical computations and those modeling and all these things to a minimum. So he sat down, he worked out all these results by himself, the known results, and that came out as a book in cosmology. And I mean, only after this book, these later contributions and all came, which was not really found in this book. So he did this complete cosmology as a way of learning the subject, and he also taught these things. In the process, he was also teaching a course on cosmology to his students there. Then he comes his, he wanted to teach this quantum mechanics course for at what we call as MSc level quantum mechanics, which he taught for several years. So he had these books on lectures in quantum mechanics, which is also a very sort of a nice book, and which also has sections on his opinion, things on foundation problems on quantum mechanics and all. And then he, this is in 2015. Then he thought he has to learn something new, and he offered to teach, because he wanted to learn astrophysics. So he started teaching astrophysics for all the students there. And then at the end of these courses, when the notes he made, and then the classroom lectures, it came out as a lectures in astrophysics. And that came, as I said, in 2019. Then afterwards, he wanted to, learn about the older developments in quantum mechanics. So he offered to teach what we call as a modern physics. So do you see this title of the book is Foundations of Modern Physics. And this appeared in this January of March or something of this 2021. So and this book is completely deals with modern physics. Which I have not seen this book. So I mean, what it says is all the modern physics and also the later developments and all. He has sort of a built. He has sort of explained that. No. So this again came out as a part of. He taught these kind of courses to the students there, and then he has sort of a written written books of sort of this kind. I mean, books on modern physics. So only person on this modern age we can compare is like Landau, who wrote books on various kinds based on his teaching. But here, Weinberg has somewhat, in that in the era of scientists. Apart from that, he's very well known for a great communicator of science, and he has written several sort of a non-technical books. Of course, this book, these first 3 minutes, is I'm sure many of you, or at least in my generation, people will all be knowing. This book is a book when he wrote this gravitation and cosmology and the physics of the early universe. He did worked out all the theory and the calculations and all. Then he felt that's a very nice thing to be written for a broad audience. This book does not contain, I think, any equations or anything. It is for a popular level book for a general audience, and that he wrote this book. It's in 77, and later, it got updated with some new results. Then he wrote about the discovery of subatomic particles. This again, is a general audience book from the days of Roentgen to others, various particles, how they were discovered. This is again no equations or anything. It is completely a technical book, a non-technical book. Then he wrote this book, Dreams of Your Final Theory. See, in 93, this book was written around the time when in US there was a proposal to have a super collider to test and find out the Higgs boson and all. And there were a lot of opposition from some other scientists, and he wanted to write a general book about the particle physics developments in an right, so that for a general public can even understand and appreciate why one should have this. Of course, his this book came out, but he was a very very strong defender of having high cost this kind of super collider experiments, and he failed in that attempt and it was scrapped, which later CERN took over and they got several Nobel prizes, which US missed. And he wrote a book with that. In that background, he wrote this book. This book is called Lake Views on this World and the Universe. This is basically a collection of many of the general articles he wrote for the New York Times and many such general for the newspapers and all on various aspects of things. And the lake views because in his house he has a home in which there is a view where there is a lake, and so therefore it's called as a lake views. And there is next is he wrote this book, Facing Up, this science and its cultural adversaries. So it's again about many non-science activities, non-science things like astrology and so many other things, which he did not like. And here's this again, I think, if I remember correctly, this again a collection of various articles from different period, so which he wrote for a general people. So there's a collection of this has come out in that. So basically, he takes about many anti-science articles, anti-science point, which on that he wrote. This Glory and Terror is about about the dangers of a nuclear war. So he has very strongly opposed to many of the nuclear war. And about the danger of nuclear war, and some of these are also sort of aimed, or it seems with towards the then American president and his action towards a nuclear bomb. And he wrote this article to caution the general people and the science administrators about the dangers of the nuclear war. The next is again to explain this world, this discovery of modern science. This is again it's something he starts from the years of Ptolemy and Aristotle and all, how sort of a science slowly sort of developed, and been what are the and to write this kind of this again a general book about from that date to the modern days, how the scientific explanations developed, and with what are the contributions and what are the thoughts of those people and all. It seems, I mean, in some interviews he says he was, when he was asked what were he reading, he said he was reading Ptolemy's books. And this third thought is also something, I think, I don't remember what it is. It's again a collection of his articles which he wrote. So this is the way he is a kind of a person who's I mean, who has also been well read about Shakespeare's or any of the very classic books, and all of them he was also spending time on reading such things. And in that sense, he was also a classic, a scholarly person. And see, as a man is a very see, first thing is way of the research. He was doing research, always at home. And in fact, he said, he was not hard to interrupt. I mean, in a sense that he says, in fact, when he works, he keeps a television set, in front of in his writing table, and then in his desk, and then he does keep doing the calculation, and he'll be watching a movie. In somewhere else also, he says some of the old black and white Western pictures he'll be watching, and the same thing he'll be looking at it, and he'll be parallelly doing all his sort of a work. And he goes to the office only when there is a class or when he has an appointment with his students or anything. And most of the time he works, and like he says here, because I find working in theoretical physics so far away, he wants to be in touch. So this is sort of a way of doing it. So this is something which is I read in this CERN Courier. I mean, where he says, when somebody even asked him, "Is it true you really did?" He really had a small black and white TV, some TV there in his house. And many of his opinions, he was very strong and vocal about it. And in fact, this is now people as oft-quoted statement that, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But then for good people to do evil, then that takes a religion. So that's a way he has countered somebody else. And he was also a strong supporter of Israel. He's a Jew. And in fact, in 2000, when some act of Britain he did not like, so he was supposed to visit the UK. It seems he refused to go there. So, so any of his opinion, whatever it is, he is very sort of a forthrightly, he will sort of express it, and he sort of stood by it. And he is also known to be a very much an encourager of younger colleagues. In fact, this is something as a personal thing I sort of encountered. Which I just so I mean, when he wrote his book on quantum field theory, there was some work which he refers to it, which I wrote to him and told him that I sent him my reprints, and told him that this is something similar work I did. I completely forgot about it. Out of blue, I was completely shocked when I received a mail from him and said that he said, thank you for your letter and reference. He said, I will consider adding a reference. And then I completely forgot that. I thought, as a courtesy, he's just written that. And out of about 10 months later, after about 7, 8 months later, I got again a mail from him, 1998. No, he said that I'm now printing, and I it will contain a reference of your papers. So this was something I was completely shocked, and I was really elated when I just sort of received this. So with this, I will stop my talk, and I'm very happy that when a person of Weinberg time is we are all living, and we hope that his books and his articles and things we will all read, and I'm sure all of us will benefit a lot by him. And, so he will continue to inspire, through his writings and through his books and through his articles. So I will stop with this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah,
So, since we are running short on time, I think we should quickly move on to the questions and discussions from other people in the talk.
yeah.
So, I would like to invite Professor Surjit Dhara, sir, to express his views. Um, I guess there is some issue with Dhara sirs because he has raised the hand. Maybe we should move on to the other person. Um, it's Shubham Saha. He has a question. Please go ahead.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, can you please explain that how the effective field theory is different from the quantum field theory and what the length scale it is dealing with?
See, the effective field theory is not different. It's only a way of doing quantum field theory. We are just doing the quantum field theory, but usually quantum field theory, sometimes there are problems with some divergences happens in field theory, and then we have a way of handling it and all of that. So in this situation, how we understand the field theory is to re-express the, for a given system, you write a quantum field theory in a sense. You write the thing is that you way does effective field theory is you take to study a phenomenon, write a most general theory consistent with all symmetries, and write a most general terms. And then if there are dimensional terms, you put it by some scale in which the theory is valid. See, every theory, quantum field theory, has a regime of validity is that. You cannot apply quantum electrodynamics to the Planck scale and all, because there are so many other phenomena will already take over. So like that, you write. The effective field theory is only a way of actually using quantum field theory. That's all. It's not different. It's a quantum field theory. How you are going to use it for a phenomenon? Yeah,
Okay, sir, I have one another question.
yeah.
Sir, for the vacuum, the energy density is said to be that 10 to the power 120. Is it because there are infinite number of fluctuations in there and we have to consider all of them?
No, see, this actually, this estimate basically comes from collecting the zero modes of the particles. So what these numbers and all, it comes from the known physics, the zero modes of, basically counting all the masses of the known particles like quarks, leptons, and whatever we know of. So that's in that sense, that's sort of an estimate is sort of made. So it's a, yeah, in field theory also has something analogous to the 0 point energy that usually we sort of a normal order and remove it. But for gravity, you can't do that, because that becomes a source for energy, becomes a source for other gravitational things.
Hello.
Oh,
Yes,
yes, sir. Hello, sir. Yes, sir. You can please speak. All faculty members on the call can please unmute their mic and speak.
No, things are frozen. That's why I'm just thinking whether.
Yes, sir. I was thinking that it's a glitch from my side, but yeah.
No, I see the speaker missing now.
Oh, okay. I'll call him, sir. Just a
Yeah,
second.
yeah. In case. Yeah.
Hello. Hello, I'm sorry. There was a connection went away. Pardon. Yeah, hello. Sorry.
Is a
Hello, I'm just connecting. Hello.
yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Shivkumar, can I ask?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it was a very nice talk and very informative. I think I really enjoyed listening to you and a lot of new things
thank
to
you.
me. Okay,
Yeah,
but I
thanks,
just
thanks.
have two clarifications.
Yeah, sure.
One is about the dark matter and dark energy. Is Weinberg's things have good contributions in this to understand
No.
these things also?
You see, dark matter, not I know of. Maybe you see, dark energy. I mean, he is also not. I mean, see, one is dark matter. Dark energy is still an unsolved problem, and there is dark energy. At least he brought the problem to the forefront, and in that sense, only he made contributions. I mean, his other works on cosmology, I am not familiar. I'm not so familiar.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Cosmological constant. The contributions of the cosmological constant.
Yeah, cosmological constant and the dark energy are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, to some
Okay.
extent, both are synonymous.
So, if I ask you, is that the unification in your understanding, is it complete or one needs to do
No.
more?
It is not at all, because
Not at all
we
complete.
have only unified two forces. To
Okay.
an extent, three forces have been unified, called grand unified theories, which are still not borne by experiment. The four unification with gravity is still an unsolved problem, which is what people on string theory and others are trying to do. So in that sense, I mean, for unification of all the forces has not taken place. So
Yeah.
there are only two forces, and this standard model seems to work so far exactly. There is, I mean, unfortunately, nobody could find much of deviations from it, which keep people active. So in that sense, it is as sort of a stable like writing a Newton's equations or something.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
one more last
Sure.
my question.
Yeah.
With respect to superconductivity, because
Yeah.
if I take simple metals which originally the BCS has given, what is that Weinberg's contributions which gave much deeper insight which not understood by BCS?
No. See, first of all, one should say he has not given anything new. Whatever in fact, in this article, he says whatever he is saying, it is well known to experts.
Mhm.
Only thing is that he says is that you can understand the basic phenomena, right?
Okay.
Can by assuming this one sentence that it is electromagnetism is a spontaneous breakdown of a gauge symmetry. With that one sentence, you can broadly understand. If you want to go to the details, I mean, one should go to the microscopic theory. And he also says very clearly that he has not said anything new. He says, I mean, the original BCS theory did not contain, and he also says that whatever he said is known to all the experts. So it is mostly a pedagogic article.
Okay.
So that is what, in fact, he is very clear in that. He says he is not claiming any originality in it. He says it is a pedagogic article for Nambu's contribution. He learned to, I mean, he wanted to learn for himself, right? In his own, for his satisfaction. Therefore, he just wrote that article. That article is there, and even his book contains it. Volume 2 has his own presentation of this thing is there in it.
And now that explanation is quite common, and it has an analogy, like for example, Higgs mechanism is the Meissner effect, and so you have an analogy
Okay.
between
You can bring
spontaneous
some
symmetry
analogy
breaking.
between this and condensed matter.
But he actually shows how all the phenomenon can be just works out.
London equation,
Everything just
everything
comes
you can
with that
get from.
Josephson effect and all these things.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you
how
very
we
much.
teach. That's how we teach here in the school
Yeah.
also.
Can I ask a question,
Yeah,
please?
sure. Yeah, yes, Professor Patek.
Shiv Kumar, congratulations for giving a very nice talk. Even a person who is not in working has been able to understand something. Although you have already said that all the four forces unification is far away, but is there a possibility that unification of three forces, that is minus gravity?
Yeah. I mean, see, there is
that
lot
is
of efforts are there, which is called a grand unified theory. Weinberg also contributed in it. All the three forces can unify. One is these coupling constants we call are not really a constants because they depend on the scale in which we look at it. So all these three forces unify at certain energy scale. That is around 10 power 15 GeV or something, which right now we don't have accelerators or anything to study those things. So the three forces, and then there is a model. I mean, there are several models, which all of them come under one gauge group. For electroweak theory, it comes under SU2L cross U1. That's a gauge group. So, I mean, for this grand unified theories, there are some SO10 or SU5 and all. There are gauge groups are there. There are models which constructed. Several models are there. So, which one is what nature has actually chosen is something we should wait for the future. I mean, when the accelerators of that comes out, and then only then we will be knowing. See, right now, it is not really seen, and some of the predictions are also not seen. One of the prediction was proton will decay and all. So proton decay is also not seen, which comes out from those models. So in that sense, it is still an open question of which model is right and how it precisely it is. Something equivalent of models.
In fact, even University of Hyderabad is working on one of the signals for this model, which is called the leptoquark. So Bhavna and Rukmini, many people are working on. Bhavna is working on leptoquarks at CERN. So School of Physics is also involved in this whole search.
Very, very good. Very happy to know that. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Umar, this is Suresh.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Your talk was very nice and very informative, fantastic talk. And see, there was some criticism when after he wrote about gravitation and cosmology.
Your video, please.
I'll do it later.
Okay.
There was some criticism of he wrote gravitation cosmology. A particle physics wrote. Yeah. Do you like to comment on that one? There is
which one? Particle physics.
Right.
Gravitation and cosmology book has written now. Then there was some comment later. Particle physicist wrote a book on general relativity.
Yeah. That is in 70s when he wrote that particle things. In fact, he says in his thing also that book introduction also that he is dissatisfied the way gravity is taught and as if it is different from the other one. So one is therefore he had see in each of these teaching he has his own perspective, right? The way it should be taught, the way he feels satisfied in communicating to the students. Therefore, he felt that gravity should be taught in a way comfortable for a particle physics person to write. And certainly in 70s when he wrote, I think people were not, the conventional gravity people were not sort of happy about this way of doing it. Somehow, see, I mean, he removed emphasizing the geometrical aspects of gravity.
And algebraic.
So usually people were emphasize most on geometry of space-time and all. He says, why you want to give too much of thing for a space-time being sort of a unique thing, and this after all gravity is a part of one other force for a particle physics person. Therefore, he said that why not we treat also you teach also gravity or you explain also gravity in that perspective. So in that sense, he made he wrote that book, which I think was not much liked with the classical relativists, but then. But then it also helped for many particle physics people to learn the subject. In 70s and those generation were never had a course like the way we have for our MSc students. And this book certainly helped for that. And also he contributed for people to early universe calculations and all these things for people to get into. His book was very useful, and he also made contributions in that. So in that sense, his book was yeah, it was really not only that. So every book he wrote has certain perspective and said, but that book was something which we can pedagogically follow in the class. It was something comfortable for everyone to sort of learn. So that's something that was nice about that book. Which is same way cosmology book also, in later book on cosmology is also there. One can really work out all the analytic steps, which was not, which many papers are not there. He re-derived in his own way the known result. So there is nothing published, but then he re-derived in his own way for his satisfaction, the way subject. So his book on cosmology is also in this sense a very interesting book. And after doing that, I mean, he started writing papers on cosmology. In fact, this book came first when he did that, and later he did a lot of other things.
Yeah, right. Now that also inspired. First 3 minutes inspired Patnav to write after 3 minutes also. Right?
Yeah. First 3 minutes was on till the nucleosynthesis. Other things happened, but later the thing was other phenomenon which happened. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very nice talk, Professor Shivakumar. I mean, really enjoyed, and you gave a historical perspective of how things emerged out, and a holistic view about the person, his contributions, his life. So I think it's a very good way of celebrating a person. So I thank you for this giving this talk, and I also take this opportunity to thank JSC for organizing this talk. Actually, a timely event, and I congratulate JSC for conducting this event. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Professor Shivakumar.
Yeah.
Nice talk.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So actually, I would like to request the department to keep this talk on available to those students who have not attended this.
I think JSS must
record it. I'm seeing that it's being recorded.
Yeah.
I request the department to make it available to all the faculty and students so that they can listen to whoever have missed the talk. Very nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
I think that would be a good idea. Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
I think they have some YouTube channel or something. They have told me that. Yeah.
Good job.
Oh, thank you. Professor Tata, you want to, please. No, I think you are not audible.
Professor, you are muted, sir.
You are muted. Can you please?
Professor Tata, you have to unmute yourself.
No. So this is about mild anthropistic principle.
Yes.
Okay. There you mentioned a word called life. So I'm just trying to see how.
Please expand. Anthropic principle is something which people don't boldly come out and say that. You see, anthropic principle is basically, it tells you that, right? Why certain thing is happening is because of otherwise you and I won't be there. For example, planets. I mean, these are certain things I'm just quoting from Weinberg's interviews and talks. Nothing original in it. So, for example, you take planets, right? If the Earth is somewhat much closer to the thing, there won't be life on Mars. There won't be life on Neptune. Earth must be somewhat closer to it. If it was a little bit closer, you won't be life. If it be a little bit farther, there won't be life. Therefore, if you ask why it happened, that the favorable conditions was there, so that there is a life must happen. So in the same way, for saying cosmological constant, there are various ways of understanding it. So ideal situation, which anybody would like to say, is that cosmological constant is small. You talk from a first principle and try to derive that and do it. Weinberg himself says that is his wish. If he can know the real reason, he would like to write a PRL paper and get published and then say that's the way one should think of. But then with the absence of it, right, what are the ways in which it can happen is, right, I mean, see, this is that there are, this works is, see, if it were cosmological constant is not this value, if it was bigger, their life won't be there. In this universe, right? The equivalent of planet comes to be the equivalent of the universe. If it is, if there are several universes are there, or several parts of your one big universe, where there are several kind of cosmological constants are there, then there is a possibility that life exists when for this cosmological constant to take a value, a particular value which happens. So this cosmological constant value, if it is more or less, that life would not have happened. Therefore, so this is actually is called as anthropic principle. In a very strong form of anthropic principle is something, it comes close to some religion or something. Why it happens? Because God wanted us to be like that, and that is why this way cosmological constant is taking some value, right? That's kind of thing is, which we would, but then there is a, so he called it as a mild anthropic principle. This is what, this is works. There are several parts of the universe where this kind of thing happens. So this kind of thing happens somewhat in string theory at some stage. There were different kinds of vacuas are there, which is actually, their theory is what they call as a landscape. About 10 power 500 vacuas are there, which means that in each of them there can be a different universe with a different coupling constant, with a different Planck constant, and with different velocity of light, with different things can be there. There can be several universes. Among them, there is one or two things which are favorable for life to. Then he says that anthropic principle can be of some use into this. But when Weinberg wrote these reviews of modern physics article, many of them are not known. This is, that's why I wanted to emphasize the year in which he wrote it. 70s or in 75 or something, he wrote it. These things comes at a much later principle. See, when anthropic principle was given by a scientist like Weinberg, he also got a lot of, shall I say, bashing from several people to say that, but he sort of ignored it, and then he said, he said this is something as a last resort. If you see, one stage people thought cosmological constant was exactly zero. If it were exactly zero, then there can be some symmetry mechanism, something happens which can make it zero. But then it is not completely zero, but then it is somewhat small, right? But then our estimates said it is very, very big. Therefore, we have to really worry about it. So, after he wrote that paper, there are several others are all started really thinking about what the cosmological constant, why it should be worried about it, and all. So, that subject became more, I think. So, his anthropic principle is one of the 5 suggestions he gives in that paper for solving that, which he has not solved. It is mostly bringing the problem to the forefront, and he suggests a mild anthropic principle as one possible sort of a way. And as I said, he himself says that for that to be meaningful and give a scientific meaning for it, there should be several parts, several universes or multiverses must be that, it's a word which is used. And the probability, in fact, he did many of these kind of a work also. Making a Bayesian kind of statistics and looking at, bad, I don't know the details of that work, but he also studied these things. The probability that it's taking certain value is higher in this region, or some things of that kind also he sort of studied. So in that sense, anthropic principle is something which is really abhorred by many scientists. But then he was sort of bold enough to come out and stick his neck out and say that yes, this is the kind of thing which can happen. Why not you think about it? But later people, at some stage, penny string theories and all were very happy that, when it was an embarrassment for them, right? String theory is supposed to be a thing, and ultimately even a vacuum is not unique. And so these things had some way of people looked at it. I don't know the present situation of that subject now, what it was. But at one time, it sort of, helped, and for him, for this idea to take shape, that embarrassment was sort of being put to use. So, but anthropic principle as a general thing is something which people sort of abhor. But it's a mild form is something which we have to. So most likely, if we have to live with it, that will be true if different parts of the universes are there, which is going to take different values for the cosmological constant. Here, the probability of that value is higher, and we are living here.
Yeah, otherwise putting anthropic, because we are here to ask some questions.
Yeah. That is, that's actually is it. Otherwise, there won't be a. But then we can ask, why should nature worry about you and I are being here to ask that question?
Right.
That, but why nature has chosen? You see, ultimately, we are asking why nature has chosen this value. right? So is there a mechanism? Is there something we understand? So when you want to explain a phenomena, right? Whole thing is to sort of explain. So whatever you are saying, we have to give an explanation of why things are the way they are, right? I mean, in that sense, is there a way of doing that? That's what this anthropic principle is. So that's why I mean, I emphasize. I mean, although other things I did not emphasize, this other mechanisms which are all more conventional way of doing it. Anthropic principle I emphasize because I mean that is something his boldness is something which is people are sort of telling.
Yeah, first time I was hearing. That's why it's very, very
nice.
Maybe I will read it. Probably I'll come to your room.
If you Google anthropic principle, you would see it is so many. I mean, varieties of anthropic principles. I mean, in fact, at once anthropic principle came with many people of religious thing, especially Christian religion people. They were also very happy because they thought it is a kind of a thing which helps. Kind of a genesis or creationism versus other evolution and also, but then he's one of the very, very strong critic of even a god. Forget, leave alone religion. He's a very I mean, he stood up and said he doesn't believe religion or God. So I mean, so there was a lot of irony in it, and he is also points out many in interviews and all about such things. Mm-hmm. So anthropic principle bringing it to a limelight is what his contribution.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Professor Tatus, any cosmology, the anthropic principle is a very, very concerned question actually.
Yeah. That is, and also this cosmological constant. Although he brought it, I mean, it was something I just mentioned in a past. Zeldovich was one of the person who first realized. Zeldovich is a Russian scientist. Actually, he did so many in fundamental physics, and he was doing a quantum field theory. After he saw the cosmological constant, he felt that I mean, this is not something he would like to do because there is something inherently wrong, and he devoted his mind to other sort of areas in physics. He said there is something seriously wrong in the quantum field theory itself. So I mean that's also.
But the Zeldovich time, cosmology, all things are completely ignored subject now those days. Nobody took it seriously.
Yeah, but he did a lot of work on it. There are books by Zeldovich on relativistic astrophysics and all. But he has contributed a lot. I mean, in his thing. But I mean, Weinberg, it's actually in lectures he gave somewhere, and based on it, so I mean, he brought the problem to the broader audience and to a thing. That's what he sort of aimed to do.
Good.
Yeah, any other questions?
Sir, I think we are going over time, so I think we'll stop it over here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk.
Welcome. Thanks a lot.
It was very nice lecture, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Sayonara.
Bye.
Yes, sir. Just a minute. I'd like to call Sarah, my fellow coordinator, to just give a small vote of thanks.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for such an enlightening and wonderful talk. I am sure I speak for everyone present here today when I say that we all learned something very valuable and we have great takeaways from this talk. And this question answer sessions was equally as entertaining and enlightening. And it was a great session overall. And thank you everyone for attending and everyone who made the session such a success. We hope to see you all in the next event as well. So looking forward to it. And thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you.